A month ago, an airline died. Not went bankrupt or got bought. It died.
Spirit Airlines is going out of business. The airline said early this morning that it has begun shutting down operations. It's also canceled all upcoming flights.
Stopped flying forever. At 3 in the morning on May 2nd, the last Spirit airline flight touched down at Dallas-Fort Worth. 175 passengers on board. They didn't know it. The crew did. Just before landing, the pilot opened the radio. He asked the tower if any Spirit flights were coming in behind him. The controller paused and said, "You might be the last one." This is a story of how a yellow airline went from a most profitable carrier in America to a final radio call at 3 a.m.
On here, so you might be the last one.
In less than a decade. Most people think Spirit collapsed because passengers hated them. They didn't. Spirit collapsed because of three things nobody saw coming at the same time: a federal judge, a factory defect, and a war on the other side of the world that spiked the price of jet fuel by more than 100%. Let me walk you through it, because the version you've seen on the news is missing half of the story. Spirit Airlines started in 1980 as a trucking company in Michigan. I'm not making that up. Their original business was hauling cargo across the Midwest. Somebody at the corporate looked at all those trucks and thought, what if we did this with planes? For 15 years, nothing about them mattered. Discount tickets, used jets, original brand most Americans had never heard of. Then in 2006, a man named Ben Baldanza took the CEO chair, and he had one idea. He had been watching Ryanair in Europe, the yellow Irish airline that charged for everything, insulted its own customers, and printed more money than any flag carrier on the continent. Baldanza looked at America and said, "We don't have one of those yet." What he did next was almost surgical. Seats got thinner, trays disappeared, legroom shrank to 28 inches, about the same as a chair in a third-grade classroom. Then came the fees: carry-on, checked bag, boarding pass printing, seat selection, even water. They tested charging for the bathroom. Actually tested it, and it worked. By 2014, Spirit Airline had the highest operating margin in American aviation, higher than Delta, United, and even Southwest. The airline people made jokes about was quietly the most profitable one in the country. On paper, it looked unstoppable. But here's what nobody at Spirit noticed. The whole model depended on one assumption: the big legacy airlines would never lower themselves to compete on price. That assumption was about to die. In 2012, Delta launched something called Basic Economy. The whole pitch was, we'll be Spirit, but with a brand. Strip out the comfort, drop the price, throw it onto the same booking page, right next to the full fare ticket. United copied it. American did the same. By 2017, every major US airline had a budget tier. And the calculation in your head when you open Expedia changed overnight. It used to be fly Spirit and suffer, or fly Delta and pay double. Now it's like fly Spirit for $89 or fly Delta for $99. For $10 more, you got a real airline, frequent flyer miles, a drink, the ability to pick your own seat without your wallet bleeding. What do you think people picked? Spirit's whole identity were radically cheaper stopped being true. The legacies didn't have to beat them, they just had to get close. Margin shrank, they kept shrinking. Then COVID hit, and Spirit somehow survived the COVID. Federal aid, leisure routes, short-haul fleet built for exactly this kind of market. They came out of the pandemic with a heartbeat, and then 1-2 showed up. In summer of 2023, Pratt & Whitney made an announcement that quietly destroyed half of the airline. The gear turbofan engine, the one powering nearly every new Airbus A320neo on the planet, had a defect. a powder metal contamination problem buried inside the high-pressure turbine. Hundreds of engines, possibly thousands, needed to come off the wings and go for maintenance. The teardown took on an average more than 250 days per engine. You heard that right, 250 days per engine per aircraft. Spirit had the youngest Airbus 320neo fleet in America. More than 40 aircraft grounded, about a quarter of the entire airline parked on the ramp, generating zero revenue while monthly lease payment kept hitting the books. You cannot run a low-cost airline when 25% of the fleet is on ground. The math doesn't work in any universe. Pratt sent compensation. It didn't come close to covering the bleeding loss. While Spirit was bleeding from the engine crisis, JetBlue showed up with a wrecking ball. Out of nowhere, JetBlue offered $3.8 billion in cash to buy the entire airline. The Spirit board was already talking to Frontier, a friendly merger of two yellowtails. They walked away from Frontier. They shook hands with JetBlue. For about a year, it looked like Spirit had escaped. Then the Department of Justice sued. The case landed in front of the federal judge in Boston named William Young, 83 years old. Reagan appointee, he had no particular reason to care about the discount airlines. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Spirit CEO took the stand and admitted under oath that without merger, the airline might not survive. JetBlue lawyers swore the deal and would help passengers. And on January 16, 2014, Judge Young walked into the courtroom and read his ruling. The judge ruled blocked, not delayed, not modified, blocked. The lifeboat was gone. Spirit stock fell 47% in a single day. The airline tried to restructure debt, cut routes, sold all their aircraft. None of it was enough. On November 18, 2024, Spirit Airline filed for Chapter 11, the first major U.S. airline bankruptcy in over a decade. And here's where most people stop telling the story. They emerged from bankruptcy in March 2025. Yellow planes still flying, restructured debt, new ownership, headlines moved on. But that's not the end. That's halftime. 5 months after emerging from Chapter 11, Spirit Airlines filed for Chapter 11 again. In bankruptcy law, there is a slang term for this. They call it Chapter 22. Two Chapter 11 back-to-back, it's almost always a death sentence. The numbers were brutal. Spirit has projected $252 million profit for 2025. And instead, they lost $257 million in a single quarter. Total debt below past $7.4 billion. Domestic fares were softer than restructuring plan assumed. The premium seating gamble, the attempt to stop being a true low-cost carrier, wasn't pulling the numbers fast enough. Frontier showed up again, twice. They offered $400 million in January 2025. They offered $2.1 billion in February. Spirit board rejected both offers as too low. The decision will be studied in the business school for the next 30 years. Chapter 22 restructure plan was built on one number: jet fuel at $2.24 per gallon for 2026. Then the Middle East exploded. The conflict around the Strait of Hormuz disturbed roughly a quarter of world seaborne oil supply almost overnight. Jet fuel doubled. Spirit was suddenly paying around $4.51 at a gallon for the same fuel they modeled at $2.24. That single line item added an estimated of $360 million to their cost base. Money they did not have. In late April 2026, Trump administration offered a last-minute lifeline, up to $500 million in federal money. The catch: the government would take up to 90% stake in the airline and jump ahead of every existing bondholder. The bondholders said no. They looked at the math, looked at the fuel curve, looked at the falling domestic demand and decided letting Spirit die was worth more to them than keeping it alive under Washington control. That was the actual end. Not the bankruptcy filing, not the court ruling, a room full of creditors deciding the airline wasn't worth saving. On the evening of May 1st, 2026, Spirit Airline flew its last day. About 50,000 passengers boarded yellow A320s across the country, most of them with no idea they were on a dying airline. The final flight was November Kilo 1833, Detroit to Dallas-Fort Worth. 175 souls on board. A flight crew that had been told a few hours earlier that they were about to lose their jobs along with 17,000 other Spirit employees. At 3 a.m. Eastern, May 2nd, 2026, after 34 years in the sky, Spirit Airlines stopped flying. Here's the lesson buried in all of this. When you build an entire airline on the promise that nobody else will fight you in the price, you're betting your existence on a discipline of your competitors. The legacies didn't kill Spirit. They just decided one day they wanted those passengers too. After that, everything else, the engines, the courtroom, the war, the fuel, was just timing.